Let's talk about sweeteners since we're talking about the supplements. So supplement industry is filled with sweeteners. So prior to that, we had aspartame, right? E951, I want to say. Mm-hmm. Then we had ACE. Those are horrible, we know that. Then we have sucralose. It's good, but it's not that good as we know right now. Now we have stevia. What are your thoughts on all the sweeteners?
There was a research study that was done in Nature looking at the impact of sucralose, aspartame, stevia, and saccharin, and I laughed and said, was it like the 1970s? The last time I think I heard anyone have saccharin in anything was my grandmother's Tab soda. And so this was looking specifically just at oral glucose tolerance, so consuming these products and then seeing the net impact on insulin sensitivity, and then also looking at the role of the gut microbiome. And obviously, sucralose and aspartame were terrible. Like, both impacted insulin sensitivity in a negative way, both adversely impacted the gut microbiome. Stevia was not, and saccharin gets lumped in there as well. I think stevia, if used judiciously, and when I say judiciously, meaning you're not addicted to stevia and you're using it all day long, 24/7, I find that most of my patients do better with stevia than they do with some of the other sugar alcohols, like things like allulose or erythritol.
Xylitol.
Yeah. Monk fruit appears to be well tolerated. I think stevia, if you, like, I have liquid drops, so if I don't eat dairy yogurt, but if I have coconut milk yogurt or something like that and it's plain and I want to sweeten it, I don't have any problems with that. But, there's the processed food industry that has Truvia. So it's the granulated form of stevia, which has been, again, highly processed, is different than having a stevia plant or an aliquot, like a container of liquid stevia that's just alcohol that's been processed, maybe has 2 ingredients in it. I think that we as a nation have a sugar handling problem combined with a sugar addiction problem. And so all of these new sweeteners come out. Not only are they thousands, the amplification of sweetness is, I forget the statistics. It amplifies the sweetness factor. So there's something called the cephalic phase insulin response in our body. So let's say you're drinking Diet Coke after Diet Coke after Diet Coke, and we understand not only does our body think something sweet is coming and it's secreting insulin, we also know there's a large net impact on the gut microbiome. And the more I understand about the gut microbiome, we should all be doing things to support it, not degrade it. And so I think that's where my concern comes out is we want to focus in on like 1 or 2 sweeteners, but we really need to focus in on is we have a sugar addiction, a serious sugar addiction here in the United States.
So you would prefer a teaspoon of sugar or sucralose?
No. I would
if you only had two options.
Oh, neither, really. I would say stevia, just because I know it has a more negligible impact on blood glucose. I would rather have something that is more natural than something that's contrived in a lab. So to answer your question, I would rather someone have a teaspoon of sucrose than aspartame or sucralose, which are the artificial sweeteners, the non-nutritives. Now, I would make the argument that all of us consume way too much sugar. Like way, way, way too much. Every condiment, every salad dressing, it's sneaky, it's insidious, and we don't even realize it.
So the problem with sweeteners is what? We eat something that is filled with sweetener, for instance, sucralose, right? Our brain understands that that's sweet, and our body produces insulin to lower the sugar in the blood. But there is no sugar in the blood because there is no sugar.
But it impacts the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is it's the last 5-10 years of research that has really started to emerge, and understanding that the gut microbiome affects everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. And so nurturing the foods, like the prebiotics, the postbiotics, the fermented foods, so important. And yet,
like sauerkraut?
Yes, like fermented vegetables, yes. Kimchi, fermented tea like kombucha or miso. This is one of the examples I will give. Like, I'm not pro-soy, but fermented soy like miso like as a dressing, miso that sometimes people use it as a broth that they'll consume before bed, all very beneficial. But I think that The issue is, number one, there's a sugar addiction in this country. So people are always looking for the next great thing that's not going to impact their blood glucose, but understanding that cephalic phase insulin response, which is a real response in the body. If you consume something sweet, your body is primed for food. That's number one. Number two, we know that it has a profound detrimental impact on the gut microbiome. And understanding that we should all be doing the things to protect the gut microbiome. It always starts with nutrition, but we know that sugar in and of itself, not only does it impact the gut microbiome, we were just talking about mental health issues and how sugar drives anxiety. There's research to suggest so. So again, when people go back to a less processed diet, they will see improvements kind of categorically in many different areas.
So we've noticed, me and my wife noticed this thing I want to say a year ago. After some kind of meals, we feel terrible, not physically, but like mentally. Our mood went down. Like, why? What? And then it clicked. Like, what did we have? We had this. No way. We had a protein bar. No way.
Yeah. No, and so think about it that way. We don't say to people, like even talking to my kids, helping them understand, like, even when they were younger, I could tell when one of my children had been exposed, like go to a birthday party, which you can control everything that goes on to a point, and then they go to a birthday party and all bets are off. And so my younger son, anytime he went to a birthday party and consumed red dye number 40. Now, when I first said this to my husband thought I was nuts. And I said, take him to the movies, let him have the high C punch. I mean, I never let my kids have soda, but I was like, just, you don't believe me, go try it. He was like, all of a sudden our well-behaved kid couldn't sit still. Couldn't focus, was all over the place, was hyperactive. And so for him, every time we went to a party, we'd have to say he cannot have any red dye. Because when he consumes red dye, and he would say to me, Mommy, I can't control my body. And it was simply a red dye in frosting, in icing, in like Skittles, back to Skittles, in a lot of these foods that we think are so benign and innocuous. And if it's happening to our kids, it's happening to us as adults. We just may not be putting A and B together. I know for myself that the way that I eat, if I'm sleepy after a meal, something's wrong. I mean, something is absolutely wrong because I eat protein and vegetables, and that's kind of my mainstay.
It's supposed to give us an energy, not take us away.
Correct. So that's always the clue. I'm like, and sometimes I'll call the restaurant and I'll ask, can you tell me how this was prepared? And they'll say, well, next time you should tell us you have an XYZ allergy. I don't have an allergy. I definitely am sensitive to certain foods. But now I just tell people, I'm like, could you cook my steak by itself or in butter? And I find most restaurants,
they do that.
They will do that. They will do that. I was actually at an event with a colleague of mine who's very anti-seed oils at another level that I am. Like I try to go out and enjoy myself, and he has a little card that says he has an allergy to seed oils, which I think is brilliant because people take it seriously. And we were at this event. We all had bison steak. His plate goes down. All of our plates go down. His looks completely different. And I leaned over and said to him, that was brilliant. Your steak looks plated completely differently than the rest of ours.
It just looked differently? Like...
It was, he had a steak that was cooked in butter, and he had raw vegetables next to his. Ours was, there was some type of sauce, like it was a demi-glaze, some type of sauce on top of mine with cooked vegetables. And I was like, oh, everything's been cooked in seed oils, including that sauce. And so I was like, that was brilliant.
So we've got red 40, yellow 6, blue 5.
There's quite a few, but red dye number 40 in particular seems to be based on the research, drives hyperactivity and ADHD symptoms in kids. Like I had a young boy on my street when my boys were younger, and he had the typical, like this is what people think of when they don't have little boys and they assume this is how all little boys behave. He just had ants in his pants. He couldn't sit still. He got in a little bit of like behavioral trouble in school, but was a good kid. And this little boy was telling me, I said, tell me what did you eat for lunch today at school? And he was telling me, and I thought, this is one of those opportunities to talk to his parents in a very non-judgmental, pejorative way, because that's not my personality. It's like, really, I just want to help educate you. And this kid, when he started going to school with less processed food, totally different personality. He could sit in class, he could pay attention. I understand the convenience factor. Parents are busy, they're on the go. And things are better now than they were, when my kids were little. I made a lot of stuff. Like I was the parent that made everything, like every snack, every treat they ever had, all their birthday stuff. I made all of it because I could then control what was in it. Now there's a lot more options for parents, but I understand as a working parent how challenging it is to try to make all those things come together. But before we dive for medication, maybe it's something as simple as changing our kids' diets.
Yeah, but kids are just like rat labs. For instance, they eat all that crappy stuff. Then they go to school. A teacher notices that he is like very active. Then they say maybe you have to visit a doctor. Doctor tells you he has ADHD. Then you got the pills. And then you suppress all that energy. So in the meantime, you feed it with the crap that causes this ADHD. And at the same time, you feed it with the pills that suppresses the ADHD.
Yeah. I mean, what I think is most unfortunate, and as the mom of all boys, and you have a son, boys are designed to move their bodies. It's the role of testosterone impacting their brain chemistry. And so I think about how many kids are not able to go about in a natural state, and yet it's something that could be so easily impacted by changing their diet. But I get it. It's harder to do that. It is so much harder to do that. But I also think when we look at the rates of ADHD, anxiety, depression, and especially coming out of the pandemic, I mean, every psychologist and psychiatrist I've spoken to on the podcast in the last couple of years, I've asked them, how has your practice changed since the pandemic? And it's almost universally, like they're starting to see trends that they'll share or things that are more impactful that they've noticed have been helpful. And almost all of them say the same thing. Nutrition drives most mood disorders. There's a component. It may not be all of it. There could be other things at play. But I think this is a low-lying fruit that so many of us, just by simply adjusting, and it may not have to be everything. Maybe you're just giving your kid a different breakfast. Like instead of giving them a Pop-Tart, which I know, that's a highly coveted item, Crustables. Instead of giving them something like that, like maybe give them leftovers or find a fun thing that they like to eat in the morning. Like my kids actually, this is funny, my kids will sit down and eat like 2 cups of rice and a pound of meat in the morning. Like they literally, that is what they will eat for breakfast. I know that's probably not realistic for younger kids, but there's so many healthier options like eggs, bacon, sausage. You could use leftovers. My kids like to, put together sometimes they would do whey protein with, protein powder. I have teenagers. Sometimes you have to meet them where they are. But with younger kids, I think there's a lot of different things that you can do. We would make healthy pancakes. We would make healthy waffles. I mean, there were lots of different things that we could do when they wanted something like that. And then I would say, that's fine, but you have to have some protein with that. You have to.
You can make pancakes at home in 15 minutes. Like it's not that long.
I could take an egg, a banana, and some whey protein powder together, and I could make a pancake. Yeah. And they didn't know any better. And I was like, they're not eating a bunch of junk. I mean, that's essentially, it's like a well-balanced carb-protein ratio, and they're happy.
But it's a nonstop cycle. For instance, you eat bad food, then you have a depression, then you go to a doctor, so you're prescribed once again with the pills. You won't get all of the pills in your lifetime. Your doctor never tells you, like, you're going to take this antidepressants for, they say, 2 months, and you're good. Like, no. You're taking those pills.
Lifelong. Yeah. Well, my father just passed away, and we were going through my dad's stuff, and my dad was taking antidepressants and had been for a long time. And my brother and I were having this conversation, and I said, I think if Dad had changed his diet, I think if Dad had been willing to change his diet, which you get to a point where a lot of people are like, this works for me and I'm not changing. That's kind of where my dad was. And I said, but it made me so sad because I think his quality of life. So we were talking about kids. We can also talk about older adults. I think my dad's quality of life could have been so much better if he had changed his diet. And so I think that it runs the gamut, but a lot of it's being open-minded. And I would say to my dad, I really think you need to talk to your internist about this and this and this. And he would say, okay. And then I know he didn't do it.
How old was he?
My dad just
When he
passed away. He
passed?
was 81. So he
81.
lived a very long life.
So he could have like additional 5 years with his grandsons. And your kids would have 5
Yep.
additional more years with his granddad.
Yep. I just did an AMA, an Ask Me Anything, devoted to my dad because my purpose of doing that podcast was to say my dad didn't need to die.